So an interesting fact before we begin, Ruth is actually known as the great-grandmother of Jesus 33 times. If you follow her path, 33 great-grandmas, and then Jesus comes. So a very interesting role Ruth plays. So we start today as humans, and we understand human context in these two folks, in Orpah and in Ruth. We have, as humans, a draw to the familiar. We like our routines. We like the same route to work, the same breakfast every morning, and dare I say, the same pew on Sunday morning. Why? Because the familiar seems safe. But when life gets shaken, when we face grief, when we face loss or uncertainty, that pull towards the familiar becomes even stronger. It becomes a place of comfort for us. It's like a gravitational force of the heart. We long to return to what we know because we think it will comfort us. So what is a memory in your head that you go to in times of difficulty? What's a place that sometimes you go visit or sit or because you need comfort? What's the familiar that helps to uplift you when you are down? Ruth, especially the first chapter, is a story about that tension. Three women stand at a crossroads between the comfort of what's familiar and known and what can be an uncertainty of following God into the unknown. And it asks us, the reader, when the pull toward the familiar is strong, will we choose comfort or will we choose calling? So what does the familiar look like? So let's go back to the context. The story begins with a famine in Bethlehem. And interestingly enough, do you know what Bethlehem means? It means the house of bread. That's what Bethlehem means. And ironically, there's no bread right now because of the famine. And we see that Naomi and her husband, along with her two sons, leave for Moab, a foreign land, a land with different gods and different customs, because there is known to be food there. Now, Moab was a very practical choice for them. It was a place they needed to go. People often would go to places where there's food, of course, when there's famine. So people would shift around, especially in those times. And at first, maybe life seemed to improve a little bit. They were able to eat, they had their families, but then the tragedies occur. Naomi's husband dies, and her sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And did you notice the little joke I did with you get a car, you get a car? Because a lot of people, they read this and they read Oprah, but it is Orpah. And then they marry these women, but then the sons die. So now here's Naomi and her two daughters-in-law who are left as three widows. Now at that time, to be a widow was a difficult thing because there was no social system to uplift them. There was no protection, no economic security. They were on their own and probably would eventually become beggars potentially and be hoping to have people help them. Now, Naomi hears that the famine back home is over, so now she knows she can go back to relatives and back to family and maybe have some protection. And she makes a decision to return to Bethlehem. But she urges her daughters-in-law to not come with her, but to go back to Moab because their families are there and they would be taken care of probably by their families. And so she bids them to go back. She's basically saying, don't tie your future to me. Go home where it's safe. Go back to the familiar. For Orpah, that makes perfect sense. She loves Naomi. She cries. She weeps. We see the devastation of having to be parted from her. But she does feel the tug and goes back to Moab. The familiar isn't necessarily bad, but if it's the way we always choose to live, the safe, known road, we might miss the place where God wants to grow us. Years ago, a young woman named Maria graduated from college, and she had great grades, and she was in kind of a business marketing kind of thing, and so she was potentially had some great jobs that she could get. And a lot of her classmates got great jobs in the city and made a lot of money. But she felt this different tug, a different way, something that wasn't so familiar. She'd always grown up in the city, always lived there, went to school in the city, all that kind of thing. But she felt called away. And so instead of working in the big city in a big firm making a lot of money, she went into the Appalachian Mountains. And there she went to a small town that had about 1,200 people. And in that place, the coffee shop was the local gas station. That she was lucky if they had hot coffee that day. And her business card probably would have said something like, call me if your truck won't start or something like that. It's that kind of place, right? And her friends thought she was just throwing away her future. Why would you go there? There's no money, no career growth, no prestige. But Maria's days were far from glamorous. She worked really, really hard. She helped struggling families find food. She would fill up her truck and go up into the hills with blankets and firewood during the winter to help keep people warm. And the mountain roads, she'd often get stuck and have to wait for people to help to get her out. Well, 10 years she spent in that small Appalachia town. And Maria's work had transformed the community. New homes were built because people came in to help her, and they built homes for people. They put children in warm rooms. Children who struggled in school got tutoring because she set up tutoring, and many of them graduated, and many of them went on to college. And neighbors who once felt forgotten now started to know that they were loved. When someone asked if she regretted not taking the normal career path, she said this, I may have missed the fast lane, but I found the path where God walks slowly beside you. Isn't that pretty? I may have missed the fast lane, but I found the path where God walks slowly beside you. Now, faith sometimes pulls us out of the familiar. And that's what happens with Ruth. Ruth faces the same choice as Orpah, and the easy way would be go back home, remarry, live with her people. But something in Ruth refuses to walk away. She clings to Naomi and speaks words that still echo throughout history. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Ruth, her decision is illogical. It's not smart. She chooses poverty over provision, foreignness over familiarity, faith over comfort. She walks away from the known toward the unknown because she's not just following Naomi, she's following Naomi's God. Now, I liken this, I was thinking of an illustration around this, and my head went to fishing, because I like to fish. And I used to go up to a place called Seagull Lake, where I'd fish every year. We'd go year after year after year, and we'd fish. And so I knew that lake pretty well. And then one year I was up there, and I was taking out the boat, and I realized I go to the same spots every single time. And I said, I got to try something new. I have to find somewhere where it's not so familiar, where I don't necessarily have a chance of knowing I'm going to catch a fish. And so I started to spot out new spots. Now, when I first started to do that, I was motoring along and didn't realize there's these things under the water that kind of sometimes stick up close to the water called big rocks. And so I went flying over one, and the propeller on the back went, nuh-uh, we're done. And luckily there's another fisher person out there who tied up my boat, brought me in, and we got it fixed. I went back out. I went slower that time after that. But I went to some spots, and I had not at this point caught walleye on that particular lake, but I always wanted to. I heard there were some on there, and I decided I'm going to try this spot, somewhere I'd never been. And boom, first cast, giant, massive walleye. I mean, my arms aren't even big enough when I was like this, but it was a walleye, and it was fun to catch. So sometimes we're led to places out of our comfort zone, places we don't know, and sometimes the unfamiliar can be difficult and challenging, and sometimes even maybe a little hurtful. God still can help transform us and change us, and good may truly come out of it. So when Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem together, the women of the town were shocked. Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Mara in Hebrew means bitter. Naomi can't yet see God in the midst of her troubles. She interprets her suffering as God's abandonment. But the last verse gives us a quiet seed of hope. The last verse says, they arrived in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Hope of renewal, hope of a harvest that would feed them. Now, and the harvest is more than just a marker of time. It's a hint. God is already preparing the provision that will sustain them, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. And so Ruth goes into the unfamiliar, and the harvest is beginning. Good things are happening. Now, one of the possible difficulties in the reading of Ruth, and we need to go back to Orpah, is to look down upon Orpah. Oh, Ruth is the good one. She followed Naomi. And Orpah did not. So maybe she's the bad person in this story. Her name comes from the Hebrew root, which means neck, or the back of the neck, almost as if she turned her back on Naomi and Ruth. Orpah turned back to Moab instead of going forward to Bethlehem, almost as if Naomi said, hey, go, and she just did because it was easy. Some interpret her as abandoning the family, not following through with or taking the easy way out. But later we know from rabbinic records that she actually, Orpah, was the mother of the 4 giant warriors found in 2 Samuel, but the biblical records ignore her after she turns her back. She seems to have been a model of an obedient woman at that time, to whom the Lord eventually would treat her with kindness as she dealt kindness with Naomi and her family. But no one elected to tell her story. They only elected to tell Ruth's story. But what Orpah chose wasn't wrong. She chose a path that did not necessarily lead her to the great Hesed love like Ruth. It didn't lead her to the greatness that was a possibility for Ruth. But she chose a path that would lead her to safety. And the relationship of Ruth to Naomi is described by the narrator of the story, but should not be prescribed as a rule. Meaning, we often will judge someone like an Orpah who takes the easy way out, but sometimes that's not the way to look at it. Catherine Dube Sockenfield describes a gathering of Japanese women who were expressing a strong distaste for Ruth, the book of Ruth, explaining that it was much used by male church leaders as biblical warrant for completely self-sacrificing devotion of a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law. And that was a cultural tradition they were seeking to challenge. This complete devotion of a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law at the losing their own identity. But instead, a proper reading of Ruth is to explore the possibilities of moving away from the easy and familiar and to celebrate the moments in our lives when we do, but also to acknowledge that in many, if not most instances in our lives, we do stick to the familiar, and sometimes that's the right decision, and it's okay. But if we never move away from it, if we never challenge ourselves to risk something, we might never experience the great things God can do. Finally, and most importantly, as we hear in this book of the Bible, God is with us when we are like Ruth. And God is with us when we are like Orpah. And God is with us when we suffer like Naomi. Pure and simple, God is with us. Would you say that? God is with us. And sometimes I like to sit on my comfy chair. I've got a big couch in my family room. Big. It's got 6 places to sit. There's one that's got a big, deep... And I don't know why I don't sit on the other ones, because they're more comfortable at this point. But where do I go? I go back to the familiar. That's okay. I'm comfortable there. But then I liken it, if all I ever do is sit on my couch, and I don't get outside and do something bigger, I might miss something. So people, be like Naomi, a loving person in the midst of difficulty. Love on the people around you. Be like Orpah and be a loving person to someone else, but also be okay with sometimes going to the familiar. But also be like Ruth Because that road less traveled may be a road that brings you to glory. And that's good news, because God is always with us. Amen.